Welcome to the Select Star Podcast, your resource for innovative technology, developer topics, and more. Here's your host, Margo McCabe from the HarperDB team.
Welcome to Select Star Podcast, hosted by HarperDB. In this episode from August 2018, HarperDB's CEO Stephen Goldberg interviews Greg Cook, the founder of CloudPremise with over 15 years of experience across numerous technical roles. This discussion is in the realm of ETL and Enterprise Architectures in modern-day technology, along with how to successfully manage a modern-day engineering team. Hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Today we have with us Greg Cook, who has a background in enterprise architecture, integration, startups, and development. Greg, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I went to school at Arizona State for computer information systems. And when I left that, I went into basically consulting and building custom systems, custom accounting systems, things like that. And that led me into a lot of architecture and program management and starting to try to figure out how to get all of the distributed systems to integrate into something that was usable. And so I got into enterprise architecture pretty heavily. So I got a few certifications there, and then I got really excited about the cloud. And so really focused on getting data in and out of cloud applications and back to on-premise. So I started a couple companies in there. One company that was focused on trying to make marketing intelligence of that data. One that was more just consulting. And then now I'm working on a new startup that's a little bit out of that space. It's more in to do with influencer marketing with your product reviews and kind of your information that you're trying to bring into your feed based on your influencers.
Very cool. And so it sounds like you've worked on lots of different sort of architecture patterns, deployment patterns, hybrid cloud, full cloud, SaaS, on-premise, different areas.
Yeah, I mean, I've basically started all on-premise and then been all on cloud and have actually kind of made a name for myself as architecting across these different scenarios.
And so when you've been looking at that, what are some of the challenges? Because I think a lot of people today, at first people were really hesitant to move into the cloud. And, you know, you and I have a lot of experience sort of moving people to the cloud, but then people bought full into the cloud. And then I think within the last couple of years, there have been this shift in people realizing maybe a hybrid cloud is a better strategy. Is that something you've seen, and have there been challenges around that, or do you see people still just full on in the cloud?
Well, I think the word the cloud is really kind of a silly thing to say at this point.
Yeah.
Right? Because it doesn't really mean anything anymore because everything's just everywhere. And I think that just like you said, when people kind of embrace the cloud, like they've almost too much to the point where no one even knows what it means anymore. And so my number one concern is honestly security. And one of the things that I've realized in my role as kind of an enterprise architect is there's very few people who understand where everything is enough to understand how something is going to work and then also be secure, and you're not going to be leaking that data out. So I think that's my number one concern has been in security, just because I've not found a counterpart in security that like I keep wanting someone to like check on me.
Yeah.
Right. And there's no one checking on me. I'm like, I guess, shoot, that means that I'm supposed to be responsible for this. And so that's not something that I was expecting by being so into the different cloud architectures. So that's probably my first one. The second one is just, you know, the pattern of data and data integrity is really challenging. Because I had really gone, early in my career, again, all in with message-based, middleware and like master data management, and then you go into the cloud and everything is based upon you got this system, and so now you're just basically back to a batch framework and sending data. And so keeping the data integrity is a real challenge. I think that's the second.
And those two things sort of relate together. I mean, because one of the things you mentioned in the first part of that was security, and the security problem being nobody knows where the things are. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're talking about that, I'm guessing you're talking about data repositories and data access, correct?
Yeah, right. Anything from like a network-based security all the way down, or all the way up to like, does this user, are they supposed to have access to this thing, right? And is this thing that they're looking at correct? So it's like the whole, it's the same problem that we've always had, but it's so much more spread out now.
Because of the service. Let's not call it a cloud environment, but let's call it a services-based
Exactly,
environment.
services-based
Yeah.
environment, exactly.
And do you think that's because things are obfuscated, or do you think it's because there are just so many pieces that people are using? Is it a little bit of both? Is it something else?
Well, I think it probably depends on the specific projects that you deal with, but a lot of my consulting experience is based upon business verticals and their priorities to get things done so quickly as opposed to so pristinely. And so, when I've worked on the product side, it's a lot more focused on like the engineering precision, and versus when more in a consulting role, it's like, how quickly can we deliver value? And so a lot of things go out the window under the word business value that you would not ever put out the window if you're more focused on the product side. And so having had both those hats on, it's kind of illuminating.
Yeah, and so you're unique in the sense that most people who have a hardcore consulting background don't end up in the product side. Most people who are interested in product don't end up in the consulting side.
Yeah,
there are some examples of that, but you have kind of done both. And unlike most people, like myself, I did consulting. I realized it wasn't for me, and I left, and I went to product. You've managed to sort of maintain both and successfully maintain both, which is really interesting. But that does give you a unique perspective. And so on the product side, you're building your own product. It deals with a lot of different sort of data sources. It's dealing with private personal information, PCI compliant data, maybe even at some point, but PPI for sure. What are some of the sort of data and integration challenges you're encountering there, or you anticipate?
Well, some of it is just, I think that anytime you're building like a product, you're not always reinventing the wheel anymore. It's so easy to string together pieces of technology. So it's more of like the ditch digging of like getting the data into some kind of data store and processing it in a way that then makes sense to anybody. And so right now, for example, I'm trying to figure out which search index I'm going to be using for our product and how we're going to then index that data, and then how are we going to retrieve that information. So these are not problems that have been solved before, but it's like doing it correctly and doing it doing it correctly and doing it in a way that is secure and actually gives you the answer that you want, especially with what we're doing now, which is trying to really give people trust in the data that they're getting. I think it's the challenge of the data integrity. So in this case, it's more of a data integrity challenge of being able to say, if I have all this information coming at me and I want to have it filtered in a certain way, how do I do that correctly, and what's the right technology?
And so you have a lot more experience with enterprise architecture than I do, and you have a lot more experience working with big companies, but you also build your own products. And it seems to me, when you talk about data integrity, like even you right now, you probably have some database that you're using as your transactional store, and then you're looking for a search product. Don't you think that by folks looking at continually layering on different products and specialized tools for each one of these sort of data workloads, don't you think that in and of itself sort of exacerbates the data integrity problem that you and I have both been paid a lot of money to solve by a lot of people?
Well, yeah, I do. I think that I don't know if it's because, maybe people are just not that detail oriented and effective at doing it correctly, or if it's really that difficult. But it just seems like it continues to be a problem.
Yeah.
And to the point that I end up having to do a lot of it myself, right? Because I'm trying to make sure that the information that's coming back to our users has all of the transactional integrity.
Yeah.
And to get that to flow from my data structure through a search index so they can find the index, so that's filtered across the people that they're trying to filter it through. To get the right answer for that is actually a pretty big challenge for sure.
Yeah, and you're just starting out now, and
I'm starting out on this one,
and yet you and I together have worked on projects from companies that have been around forever. That when we worked with one large auto manufacturer, I think they had systems there that were older than both of us. That problem gets exacerbated significantly over time. There are smart people in the world. What do you think keeps people sort of replicating this problem even though they know better? Or is it that there is a solution and we just haven't found it? Or do you think it's that...
Well, that's a interesting question. I think there's some of it is a technical problem, but I think a lot of it is a business problem and like a people problem. So I think on the technology side, everybody has like a technology flavor that they believe in, and it's made them successful, and everything.
They know, and they're comfortable
and they know
with
it, and they're like, oh, I have a problem. I'm going to figure out how to solve it with the thing I know, because then I know I'll probably be successful with it. And that's, I think, where kind of trying to become more of a true enterprise architect and abstract out technology has been helpful for me, because even though I've specialized in certain technologies, I think that's where I became successful in my consulting career, was that even though I was a specialist in one area, I was actually coming to that with an enterprise architecture hat on to say, this is where this tool is not good, right? This is where you need this tool. And so being able to do that and do it without bias is very difficult, right? Yeah. Most people have bias. And then when you apply the fact that there may not be a good technical fit for it anyway, and you have people that are making decisions more based on, we already bought this product, so now we got to make it work, or we're going to put our budget in this department. So I think the human element gets in the way of this a lot. So then you end up with, hey, I've got a database over here. I've got a customer database in this product. I've got a customer database over here. Now it's in the cloud. Now I've got a cloud-based app that has its own customer database. I've got Internet of Things going on. I've got data there now. And so it's only getting worse, by the second.
That's interesting. And then you mentioned also there are business problems to this as well. And so are those business problems just, hey, I already bought this, or a vendor lock-in, or do you see other common business problems that drive people towards creating data integrity challenges?
I don't know if I don't think it's as much vendor lock-in on the business side.
Is it just speed? Like, I need to deliver something for this quarter?
I think usually, from my experience in business consulting, at least in the customers I've had exposure to, which are some pretty big customers, and we've shared some of those customers, but is definitely time to market for sure. And so I will come in and I'll say, well, here's a solution that we can do. Yeah. And here's a subpar solution that we can do faster. And every single time they will take the subpar solution because they need it faster. And so the business requirement to get something to market sacrifices a lot that would help in solve this problem in terms of data integrity and security and kind of the non-functional requirements. And I've never figured out how to solve that, except for when I've run my own companies or built my own products.
Yeah, I think I think that's a problem that obviously we run into a lot. I think that it is a common problem. I I think that from my perspective, a large part of it is from the tool sets that have been made available that people have gotten comfortable with, and the patterns sort of create that, and that people have been uncomfortable reinventing the wheel, like you said, and I think that exacerbates the problem too. But we don't need to go into that.
No, I mean, it's a good point, because I think, in some of my consulting was focused on Salesforce.com, and you have kind of two people in the world that were either love Salesforce or hate Salesforce, and so therefore any problem that you see, they either will solve it and hate Salesforce, or they'll solve it with Salesforce because they love Salesforce. And it wasn't even like any kind of like engineering discussion. And so there's very few people that were willing to like reinvent themselves. And those are actually the people who are the best, right? Someone who would say, hey, I am a Java developer and I know SQL, but I'm going to go learn Apex. Or someone who's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to go learn unstructured data model and actually
bring that to Salesforce.
And so, especially on a company that has tighter budgets, that is not kind of teaching that like self-discovery and like pushing people to grow new technologies. It's not as much vendor lock-in as it's much like mindset lock-in of like, well, I've got a SQL development team, so like I've got to fund them for work. And I want value for my business, not value for them to go out and get a new job. And so, like, why should I train them to be NoSQL engineers? Because then they're just going to get a job doing NoSQL somewhere, right? As opposed to if I just pump more product requirements down at them and say, hey, I need this, next week or next month, I'm going to build with SQL no matter what.
That's interesting. I hadn't. That's really interesting. I always learn a lot when I talk to you, but I hadn't really thought of that. Being that, and you have people you like, you trust, you're comfortable with, who've delivered for you for years, and you, even if you want to do a new pattern, they may not have the skill sets, and you don't want to go out and replace them, and you don't necessarily want to push them to learn, and you're probably under some form of pressure to deliver, and so then you end up, like one of the corporations you and I worked with very briefly had the best .NET infrastructure I'd ever seen in the world, and I couldn't believe how cutting edge and amazing it was, but I couldn't believe that they also did it in .NET, but thinking back on it, it's because the infrastructure that they had, like the people they had in place, that's what they knew.
The people, right? Yeah. And it's funny because when I talk about this, when I'm teaching some of my architecture courses, and we're talking about the patterns, and we're like, okay, are we gonna modify this system to have an API, or are we gonna put this into the middleware, and the middleware is going to do everything? And what I've learned at this point in my life is it has nothing to do with the technical architecture from some of those decisions. It's like, who are the people that are gonna build it correctly? Who are the people who are going to maintain it correctly? And so that's why I think it ends up being a lot of business and people problem more than what I've seen. So I've kind of found that enterprise architecture ends up being a lot more on the people and business side, which is why I then started gravitating back to more of a technical thing, because that's more interesting to me. Right, is I went high enough in my enterprise architecture to realize this is all politics and people, and so I'm going to go back to technical because I want to go invent things that are interesting.
That's interesting, and not to make you put that hat back on that you've tried to get away from, but if you were advising a CIO who was going to build a team, or a CTO or a chief product officer on how to build a team that is, because technology changes, right? I mean, when you and I worked together, Node.js wasn't even a thing, right? And then it became a thing, and I still thought it was stupid, and then I went out and built an entire product on it later. And Go wasn't a thing, but now it's a thing. And I'm sure at some point those things will be replaced by some other thing, and the world we live in evolves quickly now. And so it's way quicker than it was even when we started our careers, and neither of us are that old. And so you need a team today that is more prepared to adapt and to change. And how would you advise someone to build a team like that?
Well, I think one of the things that is important is, I think one of the things you could do is try to introduce more of an abstract layer in your team of architects and engineers that are agnostic and that abstract out. Because true, like enterprise architecture is supposed to deal with like black boxes and building blocks and things like that. And if that function doesn't exist, and you bring in your lead, Oracle architect, of course it's going to be solved with an Oracle solution, right? And so when you have a layer in your team that actually designs out and kind of prototypes and is really looking for, and they're not the developers, they're not actually doing the work, and then you can go out and hire that work and go hire commodity labor to actually build these things and hold them together and things like that. But your actual core intelligence being a very agnostic technology.
That's an interesting idea. I hadn't even thought of that.
And a good architect would be that. If you're fortunate enough to have a good architect on your team that can actually see through that. It's just hard because most architects are raised through a company, so then
they have some bias.
They have that bias to what made them successful, right? So to find somebody who's able to see agnostically, to say, oh well, let's actually consider a different paradigm and trust that that this is not going to make me unsuccessful. That actually is the thing that makes you successful as an architect, is the thing that you're not being biased. And that's what, if you're effective as an architect, that your executives actually want to hear, is that you're thoughtful against what are the pros and cons of these things. So maybe with this explosion of technology, it's we need to focus more on the core engineering principles as opposed to how quickly you can build something, because it's almost it's so easy to build something now that we don't know what we're doing, right? Yeah,
that's true. I mean, that's one of the that's a cool thing and a scary thing, is that even 5 years ago, building something took forever.
Right.
And now with Node and Go, you can build things so incredibly fast.
And you don't even know what you're doing, right? You're putting a couple commands into some kind of package manager, and you have no idea what code is even running on your machine or where it's even running now.
Or if it's performance, or if it has bugs.
Right. And so, hopefully we're not going to lose the art of engineering in this explosion of engineering technology, because somebody's doing engineering somewhere to make it work.
Yeah.
But the people who are then integrating it together, I think are almost so hungry to get it done and built and so quickly that the art of engineering is almost lost on that layer.
Obviously, I have thought of having architecture teams. I mean, you and I have worked with architecture teams. We've presented to architecture teams before, together and separately, and gotten approvals from them. I had never thought of the concept of commoditizing actual development, right? But internalizing architecture. I think that's a really cool model that I don't know that I've ever seen anyone do that, where you have a team of architects who are these people you've raised up, who you've grown within the organization, who you invest in, who they learn new things. They learn about new cloud technologies, new on-prem technologies, and then
they don't have to be the expert.
Right, they don't have to be the expert.
They don't have to go write every single line of code, but they are going to understand enough, and therefore the training is worth the investment.
Exactly, and they can be small.
Right.
And then but then outsourcing even the development, because development I'll be perfectly honest, and people get a little upset when I do this, but development does not require writing Node well does require skill, but it does not require the same skill as writing Java well.
I think the person who can engineer a good Node solution can probably write the Node code.
Yeah.
But a person who can write Node code cannot necessarily engineer it, right?
Yeah.
They're not bidirectionally the same, right?
Correct.
And I've never understood that until I realized that I could do both, and that was rare.
Yeah.
Right? Because lots of developers don't know how to think about what they're doing. They actually are looking for the spec to tell them what to do. Yeah. And they can translate that into their language that they're good at.
Yeah.
But that is their skill. And that is a commodity, and that should be outsourced. And the people who have the skill set to think of things in terms of Legos, right? Of I can build this, and this is the function, and these are the use cases, and these are the test scenarios. That's actually, to me, much more valuable of a skill at this point, because I can go out and find, labor in, another country for very cheap that knows how to do Node way better than I do.
Yeah, that's true. And you can invest in your people. And it's interesting because there's they have business knowledge, domain knowledge that can remain with them. And because they're remaining agnostic, they don't have to become experts, like you said. And so they can, you and I know a lot. We know a little bit about a lot of things, whereas there's a lot of people who know a lot about one thing.
That's
and
right.
I think that it's easy. I mean, I don't know if it's easy for everyone, but it's, from my perspective, it's not that hard to learn something new if you're not going to learn every little nook and cranny of it, right? And so if you have a team of people who are constantly just learning new things at, a 10,000 foot view, you can make a real investment in them and then find the node experts in the world, or the AWS experts, or the Salesforce experts, or whatever. It's a cool idea. Cool. Well, I know you're low on time, and I think that we have got a lot of interesting stuff here, so I really appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, sure.
And I hopefully will have you back sometime.
Sure, I'd love to.